Okay, we're going live on Facebook now and we're recording. So anytime you'd like to take it away, go right ahead.
All right, thank you, Gina. Well, today is the seventh and last presentation of science and science fiction. And you may wonder why I'm ending with transhumanism, which I'll define in a minute. Well, to go the massive distances to the stars via space travel, we may have to alter ourselves and or merge with robots or AI or cybernetics and or utilize them to be able to go and meet ET or other aliens. Now, whether we're going to be able to go to multiverses, as we've discussed, or time travel is a story for a previous day. I'm going to start with these graphic novels. They used to be called comic books, and we grew up with them. Some of us wish we still had them, and they're really interesting. So why am I starting with this kind of thing, these superheroes? Well, humans like heroes, and they are, in a way, our present day myths. And so I'm using myth in the Joseph Campbell way of not necessarily false, but I'll give you his definition in a minute. Carl Jung, after he left Freud, said that myths and stories, especially heroes' journeys, are a universally shared portion of the unconscious mind that connects all people and shows itself in myths. So they are deep-seated mental constructs used to make sense of the world. Another way that Joseph Campbell said it, and I'll quote, is myths evoke symbols and motifs that connect us to our deepest selves. They help us along the heroic journey of our own lives. And so I'm going to talk about how we love myths and heroes and maybe want to emulate them a bit. Joseph Campbell of Sarah Lawrence suggested that in his 1949 book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and it's a terrific book if you want to read it. He talks about monomyths, and that is motifs of archetypal mythology narratives found in worldwide myths and how they have a commonality. And it's basically that the hero ventures from a world into a supernatural wonder, fabulous forces are encountered, there's a victory, and he returns back to power. So we have a call to an adventure, a departure, ordeal, return with this learned information to his ordinary world. And, you know, maybe that's what science fiction is, maybe that's what space travel is, and so on. E.O. Wilson, the great Harvard biologist, has suggested we have created a Star Wars civilization with Stone Age emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. In other words, our evolution of ourselves, of our brain, hasn't occurred very fast compared to cultural revolutions. So where do I start? Well, we're talking about transhumanism, so maybe we should start with humanism. And humanism broadly is the goal of maximizing human flourishing, life, health, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, and you can read that. It often, but not always, involves non-preternatural or supernatural basis for meaning, meaning God isn't involved, at least in some of these versions, and it welcomes challenges of the future. And Lord knows we have challenges now and will have in the future. One of the books I would refer you to is Max Tegmark, Life 3.0, and it sort of blends in what I talked about in terms of artificial intelligence, cybernetics, and the human being. So, Life 3.0, Max Tegmark. Well, here's the official symbol of transhumanism, Humanism Plus. And if you want one book on it, and this is a bit of a weird book for most of us, it's The Transhumanist Reader by Max Moore and Natasha Vita Moore. The Transhumanist reader. So if you look at the history of transhumanism, it's not really one homogeneous entity. There's different schools of thought. Gilgamesh, probably the first book that we still have, talks about changing people, fountain of youth, elixir of life, Dante. And interestingly, the father of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, also wrote about transhumanism. Give that a thought. T.S. Eliot, Teilhard de Chardin, Huxley, and actually Haldane, the great scientist and philosopher, used this term ectogenesis, they love terms, life in artificial environments. Well, if that's not us in space, I don't know what is. So transhumanism has been influenced by science fiction, and of course Arthur C. Clarke seems to have been there at all times. Artificial Intelligence by Marvin Minsky, Hans Moravec, Ray Kurzweil, and there's even been meetings at UCLA, as you'd expect, and a journal that talks about superheroes, myths, and transhumanism. So transhumans have actually been written about in the distant past. Space colonization, bionic implants by Bernal, who is a very, very famous scientist. Cryonics, freezing people, was suggested almost over 50 years ago. And it's been suggested that superheroes are a fixation of normal humans improving themselves artificially, and it's now widely accepted and celebrated and maybe looked toward. Robert Sinsheimer, who was the provost of UC Santa Barbara, says, man is all too clearly an imperfect and flawed creature. Considering his evolution, it is hardly likely that he could be otherwise, because evolution is random. We now glimpse another route, the chance to ease the internal strains and heal the internal flaws of humans, to carry on and consciously perfect, far beyond our present vision, this remarkable product of 2 billion or 3 billion years of evolution. So a number of these transhumanists have suggested that the human species in its current form does not represent the end of our development, but a relatively early phase. And that's important for us always to remember, that we're not, hopefully, the end point of evolution. We're somewhere maybe in the middle or the early part. The first use of the term transhumanism was likely by Julian Huxley, famous scientist, and it's that the human species can, if it wishes, transcend itself. He suggested that we need a name for this new belief, and he thought transhumanism would do it. Man remains man, woman remains woman, but transcends himself by realizing new possibilities, by redesigning and altering the human condition, but they're still humans. And as I said, the logo is humanity plus, often, but not always, a replacement for traditional religion. And it suggests that Darwinian evolution can actually be replaced by human-driven or technologically driven designer evolution. And this arose from the ideas of the Enlightenment, so-called, and the Industrial Revolution. So superhuman powers in science fictions, as I showed you in our comic books when we started, range from telepathy to precognition, to remote viewing, to psychokinesis, to superintelligence, make you stronger, bigger, better, faster, like the $6 Million Man, enhanced vision, even shape-shifting, shrinking and growing, and omnipotence. So, as I've said before, we're going from real to real, R-E-E-L to R-E-A-L, and back again. And that meaning that science and science fiction intercalate, power, influence each other in many ways. So here's the 1931 version of Frankenstein, much, much different than the 1818 book of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with Boris Karloff. H.G. Wells wrote this book, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and in that, a mad scientist We're not all mad, by the way. A mad scientist suggests that they can alter animals to become like human beings. I guess we've seen the reverse of that. Aldous Huxley wrote this incredible book, Brave New World, which suggests that genetic engineering, test tube babies, incubators would be able to change humanity. And of course, Gattaca, and by the way, this is a very interesting title. You notice the letters there are 3 of the 4 letters of DNA. GATC, actually, it's all 4 letters of DNA. And in this, there's the gene poor, as Silva has called it, and the gene rich. And that brings together the idea of justice. And of course, that's on our plate right now. So there's been a lot of science fiction about changing the nature of human nature. So a good definition of transhumanism is continuation and acceleration of the evolution of intelligent life beyond its current form and human limitations by using science and technology. It advocates enhancing our skills and capabilities to survive and even flourish on distant worlds. That's why I'm including it in this series of space travel and science fiction. And we may have to alter ourselves to basically go to the stars on these multi-generational starships. Maybe we can perfect humanity, because we're obviously not quite there yet. And has been suggested, humanity has to endure at present nasty, brutish, and short lives, according to some individuals. So it's not necessarily a new species. We'll talk about that at the end if we have time. That's posthumanism. We're talking about changing human beings, but they're still human beings. Now here is a picture showing you multiple ways that we can transform a human being with memory systems, smart skin, replacement organs, already doing that in some ways, external layers, solar protected memory, and so it's a whole body type of prosthesis that's possible. Liberated from biological slavery, an immortalized species, Homo cyberneticus, new term, will set out for the stars. Conscious life will eventually spread throughout the galaxy. The whole universe has become alive, self-aware, and the entire universe will be converted into an extended thinking entity. That's if we don't destroy ourselves by hook or by crook, and or there aren't others out there, other aliens that could do the same thing. The term cyborg means a cybernetic organism, term first used in 1960. And by the way, no one ever knows who's first. That's called the Stigler's Law. And he promoted that and suggested that he wasn't the first either. But to enhance normal biologic organism with mechanisms. That's what a cyborg really is. Now, the union of mechanics, a machine, and humans has been around for a while. I'm going to show you some pictures and let you guess who came up with this art. A pretty famous guy that merged man and machine, or a woman and machine, and these are not the scariest ones. I decided not to show those, but that's pretty scary. A combination of humans and a machine, a cyborg. And of course, this eventuated in Geiger's backgrounds, if you will, of the movie Alien and Aliens. So hopefully we won't encounter that alien. Cybernetics, the mathematician and pioneer computer scientist, invented the concept. Again, it's referring in a broader way to any self-regulating system, not just computers. An automatic machine is really the equivalent of slave labor, whether we want to say that or not. Science fiction folks have known that for a long time. So let's talk about how the brain and computers can be interfaced. The first is just the brain-computer interface. Now I say just, it's not that easy, but we already have implants for Parkinson's, for the control of uncontrolled epilepsy, and it exploits digital computing. Maybe it will help us with perfect recall, accurate arithmetic calculations, and even high bandwidth data transmission. We're not there, obviously, except for the implants, which I'll show you in a minute. Well, as you've heard before, we're trying to emulate how the brain works via computer, and vice versa. We're trying to emulate how the computer works by looking at the human brain, or reverse engineering, if you will. Both have a long ways to go. But here's an example of a heart donor, if you will, addressing one's present and social network in a hybrid environment. And one of those top 100 books that I mentioned to you at the very beginning of these presentations was a book called Ready Player One. And I just saw the movie last night at home. Ready Player One is a book that you might want to get that talks about virtual reality and reality. And the point is that Percival, or Z, has one of these vests. Here's a 7-mile boot produced over 16 years ago that one can use to walk through the internet. Actually, there has been this kind of a meeting of people that are disabled, that have various prostheses, that met in Zurich, Switzerland, and had the first CYBERNETIcs. So transhumanism, as robots become increasingly powerful and even surpass us in intelligence, which some people think is going to happen in the next 20, 30 years, we may have to merge with them or be replaced by our own creations. Now, when you implant and consider brain transplants, and I think it's going to be a long time before we have total brain transplants, if that is ever possible. You know, there's an old saying that if the old scientist says something will eventually happen, he's usually right. And if he says something will never happen, he's usually wrong. But I can't foresee in the next 50 or 100 years that brain transplants would work, although some of us certainly could use them. But part of the reason is memories are what make us consistent through time. The soul, I don't know where that is in the brain. Personality, psychology, mental states over time, embodied cognition. You know, the whole body is involved. So this idea of a brain in a vat just wouldn't work because there's no input. There's no transducers bringing the outside information into the brain. And that reminds me of the ship of Theseus in Greek mythology. We can talk about later if you want. There is a movie about this. It's called Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and it's about a couple who are involved, who have some bad experiences, and they want to remove their memories of the other person. Well, they remove the memories of the other person, but along with the bad comes the loss of good memories. And so it's a very interesting and award-winning movie from 15 years ago, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So there's going to be a lot more involved than just tying up to a computer or having a computer model the brain or vice versa. If we look at engineering the betterment of improvement of human biology, there's 3 strategies. Negative interventions, curing a disease, eliminating a disability. We've already started that. The second is positive interventions, and that's improving the function of a human organism within the range of natural variation. But here's the rub, is the line between 2 and 3, positive intervention and enhancement, it's hard to draw a line right there, as it often is, as it usually is, almost always is in biology. Where do you draw the line between this and that? Are you a lumper or a splitter? as we call it in medicine. And so enhancement is an intervention that takes beyond the person's normal ability, normal functioning, to enhance them in various ways. To do that, we need to define what health is. And there's a gazillion definitions of health. And this is the one that I use. It's the state of being in which an individual does the best in the capacities he, she has and acts in the ways that maximize his or her systems. Well, that's what health is. But some people feel enhancement is a right. It's inseparable from the defense of autonomy, and that's obviously one of the big words right now in human ethics and medical ethics. Reproductive freedom, free expression, necessary for a life worth living and having. It's part of natural laws according to some religions and ethics, and our right to live needs to be worthwhile, dignified, noble, and so on. So some people feel enhancement is a right. Let me just show you something that I show in my genetics and ethics talk. So some of you have seen this. It's from the great journal, The Economist, and it talks about changing your genes. So read with me. At present, therapists aim at genes that are clearly villains. That's treatment. And the therapies last most as long as the patient, and often only as long as a transient set of cells. That's called somatic cell, if you will. But what of genes that might make a good body better rather than make a bad one good? That's enhancement. Should people be able to retrofit themselves with extra neurotransmitters to enhance various mental powers, to change the color of their skin, to help them run faster, lift heavier weights? Ladies and gentlemen, The Economist said years ago, yes, they should. Welcome to the world, the brave new world of genetic enhancement. There are problems with bioenhancement, and one is there's an old adage in medicine, to cure sometimes, to help often, to comfort always. We need to obviously cure and prevent before we get to enhancement, in my opinion. The line, as I said, between human repair and enhancement is not always clear. Some higher priorities than others. We need to make prioritization. Slippery slope as we go from improving the human being to enhancing the human being. And you can see other things here. It may commodify life. There are other effects that Doug Fukuyama from Johns Hopkins we'll talk about in a minute. Reproductive freedom, choosing one's future, and decreasing humanity's diversity, which we don't want to do, or we go the way of the Irish potatoes in 1850. Throughout history, we have used artificial means, though, to enhance our power and influence. Clothing, makeup, headdresses, ceremonial robes, feathers. You can read this. We've been doing this for 1,000 years. So we've already got a jump start in artificially enhancing our power and influence. And so with limb prostheses, we already alter ourselves. And here you just see another list. You can go down the list yourself. We surgically sculpt ourselves in various ways. We fix our noses. You can read some of these. And of course, cochlear implants, retinal replacements, deep brain stimulation. I'll show you that in a minute. To prevent seizures, depression, Parkinson's disease, and other brain implants. So we're already part of the way there. In fact, how many robots, how many cyborgs does it take to change a light bulb? One. Isaac Asimov, professor of chemistry and biochemistry, graduated, I'd say, from Columbia, and then was a professor at Boston University, lived in New York and Boston, wrote 500 books, and he says, appropriately, science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. In other words, science is always stuck on fast forward, and the ethical, legal, social implications of changing the human genome, for example, come later. Here's a quote from a rabbi: "If God had built the capacity for gene redesign into nature, then he chose it to be available to us. And our test remains whether we will use that power wisely or poorly." You've heard me quote the Buddhist temple in Hawaii that says, "You've been given the key that opens the gates of heaven. The same key opens the gates of hell." We have been modifying genetics of animals and plants for thousands of years. It's called agriculture, probably 10 to 12,000 years. And just about everything you eat, probably everything you eat, has genes, has DNA, and has been modified. Do you think the corn that we eat now is like the maize that was eaten a long time ago? Look it up. It's not. It's been changed in many ways. And here's an individual that wanted, I guess, to be like certain birds and insects that use different wavelengths for foraging or mating. I don't know if this works for this guy, probably not if he walks around like that. But to make a long story short, here is a probe that looks at not only the very, very narrow electromagnetic spectrum that our sun puts out, that we've evolved to recognize, call photos or photons, or that small billionth of a part of a range of the electromagnetic spectrum, is to expand it so that he can see in part ultraviolet light as well as infrared light. So we're maybe already on our way a short distance from the beginning of transhumanism. Woody Allen said it best: "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve immortality through not dying." Woody also said, "I'm 66 years old, a third of my life is over." But we won't go anymore with Woody Allen. The point is that a number of researchers have been looking at prolonging life, preventing aging. And there are certain animals that live a long time, as well as, of course, trees. And the question is, why not us? Why can't we live beyond the age that we live and die of? Now, I'm not going to go into detail about the various genes that have been looked at. Obviously, the way to do this is to look at the genetic DNA makeup of those people that live to be past 100 years old, and then those people that haven't lived to be 100 years old, and see what the difference is. But a number of investigators have looked at radical life extension in a variety of ways, including cryonics. Another has said, well, I can live forever if it's silicone, and I can upload my intelligence that will be there forever, assuming that the computer doesn't crash. So the search for immortality, I will narrow it down to this: the best way to achieve immortality is tremendous caloric restriction in these animals. I guess my response is they don't live longer, it just seems that way. But in any event, caloric restriction seems to do it in these animals. Telomerase are like the ends of your shoelaces that prevent the ends of your shoelaces from fraying. Well, these are at the end of your chromosomes, and they shorten and shorten and shorten as your cells divide. Multiple genes seem to be involved, probably hundreds of thousands. And then if you like red wine, it's been suggested that this in moderation may help. In fact, there are now pills you can take for this. The search for immortality goes back 5,000 years ago. Gilgamesh, a Sumerian warrior on a noble quest, encounters a Noah-like individual who witnesses a great flood, common theme, and wants to find the secret of immortality. Well, as you know, for example, in Charles Darwin's time, 3 of his 10 children died before the age of 10 or 11. That was common back then. Life expectancy in 1900 was 45 years, but with clean water, sanitation, waste removal, elimination of epidemics. 15 years was added to that, and it was 60. And with antibiotics and knowledge of germs and vaccines, take your vaccines, added another 10 years. The co-founder of Google thought we'd be able to maybe even cure death. So transhumanism may become part of our very existence. One day we may have to alter and enhance our bodies using cybernetics, or even change the genetic makeup in order to survive in a hostile exoplanetary environment. As we talked about in a previous presentation, the gravity, the oxygen, the various environments around for us to be able to travel. We evolved on this planet. Space is very unforgiving. There are problems with overcoming aging and death. Overpopulation may be one of them, although that's a little bit debated. Resources, getting food to the people is obviously an issue. Boredom, do you want to be married to your spouse for 80 years? Well, I do, but some people may not. What is the meaning? And of course, in Japan, the issue is you have a lot of older people reaching the aged, and you have fewer people being born to support those. Fukuyama thinks that it's the world's most dangerous idea, and it will change everything. What about super strength? Well, in 2014 World Cup in Sao Paulo, Brazil, a man kicked a soccer ball to start the games. Now that's not impressive, but he had been paralyzed. And at Duke University, they inserted a chip into his brain, connected to a portable computer that controlled his exoskeleton support. And by simply thinking, he was able to walk and kick the ball. I don't know if it went through the net or not. And so revolutionary prosthetics have been developed at a whole number of great universities. And there's even a gene that apparently causes muscles to expand, at least in mice and maybe even humans. Recording memories, Wake Forest, USC, electrodes in mice in the hippocampus, which is part of your learning part of your temporal lobe, records impulses when mice execute simple tasks. And later, when the mice had forgotten the task, like drinking water from a tube, their hippocampus is stimulated and the mice remembers immediately. So maybe we can focus on areas where memories are indeed stored, eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. Here's what an EKG looks like, and there's different kinds of waves. I'm not going to go through that, but people have used EKGs and other devices implanted near the brain or in the brain to try to record the brain waves, the brain function, and use it to actually move limbs and other things. And here's an example of a chip. By the way, these are the needles that go into the dura that covers the brain, or the arachnoid that covers the brain. And this is a millimeter. That is a 1/16 of an inch across. So you can see it's very, very tiny. And it goes in or near neurons and can give you an idea of which neurons are stimulated. Used initially, obviously, for the treatment of relapsing epilepsy, but also for other brain diseases. And this is just a high power cartoon of those very, very, very tiny electrodes that either go into or near neurons. Advances occur and is vital, but not inevitable. If you block the technology, you block the economics. You know, we tend to be blasé about our present times. We forget about the good old days, and they really weren't the good old days. We can't solve the problems of the future with yesterday's technology or ideas. Measles, for example, most of us think it's pretty benign, but it's not. It killed tens of thousands of children when there was epidemics of measles. So we need to be cautious about being a Luddite and enemies of change. There are risks out there, obviously asteroids, earthquakes, supernova, and we need not to be fearful. We just need to be very, very careful. Now, I'm not going to go through this. You can look back at it if you wish. It's the world's most dangerous idea is living longer, according to Francis Fukuyama from Johns Hopkins. Change is going to occur. Are we trying to be God? I guess it depends on your definition of God. Is it too powerful? Is it uncertain? In these uncertain times, is it going to fall into the wrong hands? Is it enhancement different than treatment? Does it transcend the so-called natural order? Whatever that is death not part of life? We're not ready for the social, legal implications of it. Justice, will there be equal distribution? Well, that's an issue right now, isn't it? Things are not always better, and we talked about if the older folks don't retire and there's fewer younger folks, then there won't be young folks having jobs or helping the retired folks. The good news is, though, that history in the last 2 centuries has in general shown that technological progress has been far more beneficial than harmful for humanity. Our future will emerge from the same chaotic jumble of trial and error and individual action and reaction that has formed our present. And this is fortunate because we express a collective wisdom, all of us are coming, in our actions that far exceeds that of any commission of experts or council of elders who would guide us. And I guess that's one of the foundations of democracy. Now, I'm sure you all have heard of singularity, not in black holes, but this is Ray Kurzweil's idea that by 2045 or 2049, computer power, memory, ability will exceed that of the Homo sapiens right here. And if you look, and these are logarithmic scales, these are orders of 10, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. You can see that it seems to have been a straight line as he draws it to what he considers around 2045 or 2049, where the computer singularity becomes smarter than all the human beings on this planet. Here's Ray Kurzweil's statement. The story of the 21st century has not been written yet, so we still cannot say with assurance that we will successfully avoid all misuse. But the surest way, he says, to prevent the development of defensive technologies that will protect us from hazard would be to relinquish the pursuit of knowledge in these broad areas. He believes that was the primary moral of the novel Brave New World. So transhumanism is to move beyond the earthly endeavors and explore the galaxies, maybe to even become godlike. Now, one of the journals I get is the Journal of Science and Technology out of the CTNS, the Center for Theology and Natural Science out of Berkeley. Very, very well-known, renowned, famous, incredible people are on its editorial board. And one of the things that I read that they said, which I thought was really interesting, is if we want to become like gods, then maybe we ought to talk to theologians. Theology has been studying God or gods for a long time now. So let's bring in some experts. I'm not talking about posthumanism as I end. Posthumanism, like transhumanism, has multiple different definitions, but it's basically, as I'll show you, moving beyond our species, where we have not only enhancement, but we have moved beyond our species. It will probably be like, if we survive all of this, sending astronauts, cosmonauts in different directions in the universe. Eventually, they will become so separated that they will no longer be the human species. And that's called allopatric speciation, if you're into biology. So posthumanism has various definitions, but if I had to give you 3, it's after humanism, post, after anthropomorphism or centrism, That means not everything looks like a human being or is a human being or everything is centered around us. It's all about us. And also post-dualism, good or bad, one or zero, on or off, them and us, our tribe, their tribe, is maybe eventually we'll get past that. These philosophers have written about it, and you can see more definitions of posthumanism is that we really aren't the center of everything. We're embedded in the entirety of this entire universe. We've moved past Homo sapiens sapiens to maybe triple sapiens, decentralization of us, comprehensive universe. Everything is included and linked, and there are no strict boundaries. So obviously animals and plants and trees and humans and other life forms all should be looked after. So I'm going to stop there and see if you have any comments or questions. Again, the reason I'm presenting this is that it talks about changing us so that maybe we can travel beyond our own little confines of our own little solar system, either combined with or associated with robots and AI, and eventually meeting others, I was going to say our cousins, others that actually will give us an idea about ourselves. So I'm going to end by saying that one of the things that science fiction does, and Haldane has suggested this, Arthur C. Clarke has addressed this, is science fiction imagines what humans will evolve into. It's kind of a biologic parable. It throws light on the human condition. Aliens and humans will come into contact, and aliens will view humanity from a different perspective than we review ourselves. A little bit like de Tocqueville when he came over from France and looked at the United States and wrote that tremendous treatise about what America was really like and what was good and what was bad. So, like Shakespearean tragedies, maybe it takes the foil, the antagonist, to bring out the life of the protagonist. I'm going to stop there and see if you folks, and I appreciate you being here, have any comments or questions or answers about any of these things. Thank you. Gina, it's all yours.
If you have a question about any of the classes that Fred has taught, or most especially this class, go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your hand or type in the chat. I do want to let you know that, of course, Fred is always generous with his time and his resources. And he has about 20 books from this term that will eventually make themselves way to the LifeQuest office, and we will let you know in an email when they're there and when you can stop by to pick those up if you want to. The LifeQuest office is still closed, and so we aren't sure when they'll be there, but I'm sure these books will be interesting at any point. There was a comment on Facebook I just checked a minute ago. They said you had some interesting terms. So I don't know if that meant that your whole term was interesting or whatever slide you were on at the moment was interesting words. Just thank you very much. And I'm looking around, seeing if anybody has a hand. Faye is waving.
I'll respond to that while people think. You know, defining terms is really the beginning and maybe the most essential part of all of philosophy and all of critical thinking. Even before we question our assumptions, we follow the evidence, things that we're going to talk about in the future regarding critical thinking, is defining your terms is obviously the foundation of philosophy. And I've learned a couple things. One is if you go to the etymology, E-T-Y, etymology of certain terms, and you can do that through the University of Google, you'll find out how the words were put together, usually Greek and Latin, or a combination of such. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the way terms are used now. Consider the terms myths or theory. Those are not denigrated. in the circles I run in, those are very, very important issues and not necessarily false and not necessarily just a semi-educated idea. So terms are very important to utilize. I would also say that it reminds me of the story, 1955, the president of Harvard was addressing the medical school class, and these students were getting ready to go out and conquer the world, as Harvard folks usually do. And he said, "Students, I have bad news." A hush fell over the enthusiasm. He said, "Unfortunately, we just learned half of what we taught you is incorrect." And a further hush fell over the audience. And then he continued, "And the really bad news is we don't know which half." So hopefully I've given you the right half, but as we'll talk about when we get to critical thinking in the fall semester, we need to question everything. So that's my excuse.
Thank you so much for these sessions. And I wanted to ask, are all of them been recorded for us to listen to again, if we so choose?
Yes, all of those have been recorded courtesy of LifeQuest, Gina,
Good.
Leah, Lindy, and they've done an incredible job. There's only one where we had technical problems for the first 20 minutes, wasn't recorded, but the good news is you can see all the slides. And what I tried to do is make the slides independent. Well, the ability of the slides to stand alone, even if you don't hear the audio or vice versa. So the answer is yes.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for the good references for books and also movies. Appreciate that.
You bet, Janet. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Pete, go ahead.
Fascinating. Thank you, Doctor. But I must admit, much as I love science fiction, transhumanism, as you describe it, as it seems, scares me a little bit. And let me cite one thing. The Nazis wanted selective breeding to be able to enhance humanity, enhance the Caucasian race, and the net result was I don't think people were enhanced, if anything worse, but the elimination of other people and the distinction of making the distinction between what is plus and what is negative in human characteristics was arbitrary and ruthless. I would throw that out.
I would totally agree with you. It's amazing how an idea, right or wrong, can be looked at in a couple of different ways. You know, actually one of Hitler's proteges said all of humanity, all of politics is applied biology. And what he means by that, and there's the answer, I think, what he means by that is that if you look in the 1930s, Hitler got some of his ideas about genetics and the final solution from American geneticists who thought they knew more than they really did. And so you're absolutely right. We have to be very careful. We have to consider, Elsie, the ethical, legal, social implications of everything that we do. And I'm happy to say that in medical schools and graduate schools that give PhDs in various forms of science do have classes on ethics for their people, because technology, although it's said is benign, technology can be used in nefarious ways. Yeah, the Soviets starved because Lysenko couldn't grow his wheat because he followed Lamarckian evolution. And again, we saw the final solution by Hitler. So we have been given the key that opens the gates of heaven. The same key opens the gates of hell. We need to be very careful, and we need to have canaries out there. And what I mean by that is the old idea of the coal mine is you bring in a canary to see if there's noxious, dangerous gases, and the canary will let you know. Not so good for the canary, but good for the humans. And obviously in terms of COVID-19, we need those canaries throughout the world. The reason it's spreading so much is that we're living in a 747 world. It's the 747 virus. You can go from one half of the planet to the other half in less than 24 hours. So I agree with you. Not all good, not all bad.
One other point, if I can make, when we enhance our powers, we have to enhance the morality that comes with it. And I specifically mentioned guns. And we become more strong. We can become more lethal as every individual has a gun. And yet the morality of the persons who has it hasn't necessarily been modified. And so in a sense, we've made ourselves more lethal.
It sounds like you wrote some of the great articles in theology and science from the CTNS, because that is exactly what they have said, is that you're talking about enhancement, bigger, stronger, faster, etc. Where's enhancing our morals? Where's enhancing our theology? Where's enhancing our critical thinking? Those have to go pari passu, because I truly believe that as science is stuck on fast forward, we must have these ethical, legal, social implications going pari passu with it, as sort of guards, or at least warnings, or at least let's think about what we're doing, because you're absolutely right. And it would be nice to have transhumanistic morality go along with these other things. Did you write those chapters and essays? I've got to ask, because that is exactly what so many of them said.
No, certainly not.
Well, maybe you should.
Do we have any other questions this afternoon? I don't see anyone unmuting themselves, but if you want to clap your hands or stick up a blue clap your hand or wave high and give Fred a thank you. We appreciate you teaching this term and being one of our pilot enthusiastic instructors to go forward where very few instructors have gone before.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
And thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, thanks, Jean.
Great.